My parents baptized my kids without permission while babysitting. I walked into my own house and felt the atmosphere shift immediately, like walking into a funeral home or a very tense intervention. The air was thick and humid, smelling like that cheap floral perfume Maeve wears mixed with something oddly metallic. I dropped my keys on the counter, expecting to hear the TV or the kids laughing, but it was dead silent. I turned the corner into the living room and froze. My 6-year-old son, Titus, and my 4-year-old daughter, Zara, were standing in the middle of the rug, shivering. They were wearing these oversized white button-down shirts that belonged to my dad, soaking wet, with water dripping down their foreheads onto my hardwood floor. Clarence and Maeve were standing over them, holding a salad bowl from my kitchen filled with water, looking like they just won the lottery. Maeve had this terrifying, serene smile plastered on her face, clutching a small black book. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, because my brain could not even process the visual in front of me. Maeve looked up, beaming. "Oh, Quentin, you are home early. We did it. We finally did it. We saved their souls while you were gone." Nina walked in behind me, took one look at the wet kids in the bowl, and I thought she was going to physically explode. She dropped her purse and rushed to Zara, who looked absolutely confused and on the verge of tears. "Mom, why are they wet? Why are they wearing Dad's shirts?" Nina screamed, pulling the wet fabric off Zara's shoulders. Clarence puffed his chest out, looking at us like we were the ones being unreasonable. "We baptized them, Nina. Since you two refused to do your duty as parents, we took matters into our own hands. They are safe now. They are washed clean." I felt a vein in my neck throb. "You did what?" "You put water on my kids and performed a ritual in my living room without asking us. We talked about this, Dad. We explicitly told you. No religion until they are old enough to understand it. This is a massive violation." "Do not be so dramatic, Quentin," Maeve scoffed, waving a hand at me like I was being a bratty teenager. "It is just a little water and a prayer. It does not hurt them. It saves them from eternal fire. You should be thanking us for looking out for your children when you clearly won't." Nina stood up, her face pale with rage. "Get out. Both of you. Get out of my house right now before I call the police for trespassing." Clarence narrowed his eyes. "You are kicking us out? We are your parents. We are the grandparents. You cannot keep us from them just because we saved them. Watch me." I stepped between him and the kids. "You disrespected us in our own home. You went behind our backs the second we left the driveway. That is predatory behavior. Get your coats and get the heck out." They huffed and puffed, grabbing their things with this air of self-righteous martyrdom, muttering about how we were lost causes. As the front door slammed shut, shaking the frames on the wall, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. It was a text from my sister, Tiffany. It was a picture of Titus and Zara, soaking wet in those shirts, timestamped 20 minutes ago. The text read, "Asterisk, praise the Lord. Mom sent me the good news. So glad the kids are finally protected. Shame you guys were too stubborn to do it yourselves. Asterisk." They had not just done it. They had broadcasted it to the whole family before we even walked through the door. I looked at Nina, and I knew this wasn't just a bad night. This was war. Silence is usually golden, but the silence that filled my house after the front door slammed was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Nina was on her knees on the hardwood floor, aggressively wiping up the puddle of holy water with a kitchen towel, her movements jerky and furious. I could hear her breathing, short, sharp intakes of air that told me she was about 2 seconds away from screaming or crying or both. Titus and Zara were still standing there, looking like deer in headlights, shivering in those ridiculous oversized white shirts that smelled like mothballs and my dad's old cologne. Titus looked up at me, his eyes wide and scared. "Daddy, are we in trouble? Did we do something bad?" That question broke something inside my chest. I dropped to my knees, so I was eye level with him, ignoring the wet spot soaking into my jeans. "No, buddy. You are not in trouble. Not even a little bit. You did exactly what Grandma and Grandpa told you to do, right?" He nodded. "Grandma said, if we didn't do the water thing, we wouldn't be allowed to go to the good place when we get old. She said we had to be clean." I looked up at Nina, and her face went ghostly pale. She stopped wiping the floor and just stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. They had not just splashed water on them. They had terrified them. They had used fear to manipulate a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old into compliance. That is emotional abuse, wrapped up in a pretty religious bow. "Take them upstairs," Nina said, her voice shaking but weirdly calm. "Get them in a warm bath. Put on a movie. I will handle the mess down here." I took the kids upstairs, got them out of those creepy shirts, and threw the clothes into the corner like they were contaminated. As I ran the bathwater, trying to act normal for their sake, my mind was racing back to 5 years ago. This was not a surprise attack. It was a siege we thought we had already won. When Titus was born, Maeve had brought a priest to the hospital room without asking. We kicked him out, When Zara was born, Clarence tried to sneak a vial of water into the nursery. We caught him. We sat them down explicitly at a diner 3 years ago and told them that if they ever tried to force their religion on our kids again, they would lose access. They promised. They swore on their Bibles that they respected our decision to let the kids choose their own path when they were 18. They lied. They waited. They bided their time for 3 years, playing the role of the perfect, respectful grandparents, just waiting for the one night we trusted them enough to leave them alone for 4 hours. It was premeditated. It was calculated. And that made it feel so much worse than if they had just been impulsive. Once the kids were settled with popcorn and a Disney movie, I went back downstairs. Nina was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at her phone. She looked up at me, and her expression was pure ice. "Check the family group chat," she said. I pulled my phone out. My sister Tiffany, the one who still lives 30 minutes from mom and dad and relies on them for rent money, was blowing up the chat. The picture of my kids, wet and confused, was the pinned message. Underneath it, Tiffany had written, asterisk. "Finally. So proud of mom and dad for doing what needed to be done. Those babies are safe now. Praise be. Asterisk." My blood boiled. I typed out a reply, my thumbs hitting the screen so hard I thought I might crack the glass. Asterisk. "You are sick. Do not post photos of my children. Take it down now." Asterisk. Tiffany replied instantly. Asterisk. "You should be thanking them, Quentin. They saved your kids from your negligence. You are lucky they care enough to risk your wrath. It is called love." Asterisk. I called her. She picked up on the first ring, probably expecting a fight. "Listen to me very carefully, Tiffany," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "You have zero idea what happened here. They violated a boundary we set years ago. They lied to our faces. And now you are cheering them on? Oh, get over yourself, Quentin," she scoffed. "It is water. It is a blessing. Why are you so dramatic? Mom is crying her eyes out right now because you kicked them out like criminals. They were trying to help. They were trying to control," I snapped. "They terrified Titus. He thinks he was dirty. He thinks he was going to a bad place. They told a 6-year-old he was unclean. Tiffany, that is not love. That is manipulation." She went quiet for a second, but I knew she wouldn't fold. She is too deep in the sauce. Well, maybe if you took them to church, they wouldn't have to be scared. You did this to them, not mom and dad. I hung up. There was no point. She was a flying monkey, just repeating the script. Maeve had probably fed her 5 minutes ago. I looked at Nina. She was holding a small, empty plastic bottle she had fished out of the recycling bin. "Look at this," she said, holding it up. It was a generic water bottle, but the label had been ripped off and replaced with a piece of masking tape that said asterisk holy water, St. Jude's asterisk in Maeve's handwriting. "They brought it with them," Nina whispered. "They didn't just decide to do this because the spirit moved them. They packed a go bag, Quentin. They brought the shirts. They brought the water. They brought the little Bibles. They planned this whole night around us leaving. They were probably watching the clock, waiting for our car to turn the corner so they could start the ritual." I took the bottle from her and crushed it in my hand. The betrayal was so visceral it made me nauseous. They had looked us in the eye, took our money for the pizza we ordered them, kissed us goodbye, and the second the door closed, they started their little operation. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Clarence. Asterisk. "We are home," the text read. "We forgive you for your outburst. We know you are emotional right now, but one day you will understand that we did this for the family. We love you, son." Asterisk. The gaslighting was top tier. They were forgiving me for kicking them out after they assaulted my boundaries. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, but it was a hysterical, angry laugh. "I am not responding," I told Nina. "If I respond right now, I am going to say things that cannot be unsaid." "You need to respond," Nina said, her eyes dark. "You need to tell them that this isn't a timeout. This isn't a slap on the wrist. They think they won, Quentin. They think the deed is done, and we will just get over it, because they are family. You need to tell them that they just burned the bridge." She was right. If I didn't set the tone right now, they would sweep this under the rug by Thanksgiving. They would act like the victims, crying about how cruel we were, while secretly high-fiving each other for saving the grandkids. I started typing. I didn't want to be emotional. I wanted to be lethal. Asterisk. "There is no forgiveness needed from you," I wrote. Asterisk. "You planned this. You brought supplies into my home to violate my rules. You scared my children. You are not welcome here. Do not come over. Do not call. We are taking a break from you until I can figure out if I can ever trust you with my children again. Spoiler alert, I doubt it. Asterisk." I hit send. 3 little dots appeared instantly. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. They were panicking. They expected me to roll over like I usually did to keep the peace. But the peace was dead. They drowned it in that salad bowl in the living room. My phone rang. It was Maeve. I declined it. It rang again immediately. Declined. Then a voicemail popped up. I put it on speaker so Nina could hear. Quentin, this is ridiculous. Maeve's voice was high-pitched and shaky. You cannot keep my grandbabies from me over a little water. That is cruel. That is evil. We have rights, you know. Grandparents have rights. Nina and I locked eyes. Grandparents' rights? That was a threat. That was a legal threat. They weren't just sorry, they were ready to drag this into the mud. They just escalated this from a family dispute to a legal battle, Nina said, her voice dropping an octave. I looked at the phone, then at the stairs where my kids were sleeping. They have no idea who they just messed with, I said. That phrase, grandparents' rights, hung in the air like a noxious gas. It is the kind of thing you hear on true crime podcasts or read about in those nightmare subreddit threads, not something your own mother leaves on your voicemail 10 minutes after you kick her out for crossing a line. It was not just a threat, it was a declaration of war. It meant they had already thought about this. You do not just pull that legal terminology out of thin air, unless you have been Googling it or talking to your friends at bingo about how to force your way into your grandkids' lives against the parents' wishes. Nina stared at the phone, her face stripped of any sadness she might have felt earlier. She was in full mama bear mode now, the kind of cold, calculated rage that makes me a little scared of her myself. She snatched the phone off the counter and hit the save button on the voicemail. Do not delete that, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. That is evidence. If they want to play the legal game, we need to document every single thing that happens from this second forward. She walked over to the recycling bin, fished out the crushed water bottle with the masking tape label, and set it on the counter. Then she grabbed the wet, oversized shirts the kids had been wearing, which were still in a pile in the corner. She laid them out next to the bottle and took a picture with her phone. What are you doing? I asked, feeling like I was watching a crime scene investigation in my own kitchen. Building a case, she said without looking up. They just threatened to sue us for access, Quentin. They admitted to premeditating a religious ritual we explicitly forbade. They brought supplies. They admitted it on text. And now they are threatening legal action because we enforced a boundary. We are not just dealing with overbearing grandparents anymore. We are dealing with enemies. My stomach churned. She was right. The shift had happened so fast it gave me whiplash. 1 minute we were going out for a date night, and 2 hours later we were preparing for a custody battle with my own parents. My phone started buzzing again. It was Tiffany. Of course it was. She is the golden child, the one who never left our hometown, the one who relies on mom and dad for everything from babysitting to rent money. She is their mouthpiece, their flying monkey. I answered, mostly because I wanted to hear how they were spinning this to the rest of the family. You are a monster, Tiffany spat before I could even say hello. Mom is at my house right now, having a panic attack. She can't breathe, Quentin. Are you happy? You gave your own mother a panic attack because she wanted to bless your children. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache blooming behind my eyes. Tiffany, stop. You do not know the whole story. They didn't just bless them, they ambushed them. They told Titus he was dirty. They told him he couldn't go to heaven unless he let them pour water on him. He was terrified. Oh, please, she scoffed. He is 6. He doesn't know what terrified means. They were saving him, and now you are keeping them from the only grandparents who actually care about their souls? That is abuse, Quentin. You are abusing your kids by keeping them from a loving family. There it was. The Darvo tactic. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. I was the abuser now, because I didn't want my parents performing secret rituals in my living room. Listen to me, I said, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear me from upstairs. They threatened us with grandparents' rights. They threatened to sue us, Tiffany. Do you think that is love? Do you think suing your son to force access to his children is what a loving family does? Tiffany went quiet for a split second, probably because she didn't know about the voicemail yet. Mom didn't mean that, she stammered, her conviction wobbling. She is just upset. You hurt her feelings. You made her feel like a criminal in your house. She acted like a criminal, I snapped. She smuggled contraband into my house and waited for me to leave. That is what criminals do. And if you are going to side with them, if you are going to act like their PR agent instead of my sister, then you can join them in the timeout corner. Do not call me until you get a grip on reality. I hung up and blocked her number immediately. I didn't have the bandwidth for her guilt trips. I looked at Nina, who was scrolling through her phone with a look of pure horror on her face. You need to see this, she whispered, turning the screen toward me. It was Facebook. Of course it was Facebook. Maeve had posted a status update 5 minutes ago. It was the photo of my kids, wet and confused, wearing those ridiculous shirts. But the caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It read, asterisk, my heart is breaking tonight. All Clarence and I wanted was to ensure our beautiful grandbabies Titus and Zara were safe in the eyes of the Lord. We took the opportunity to baptize them tonight, to wash them clean, because their parents have lost their way. We were thrown out into the cold for our act of love. Please pray for our son Quentin and his wife, that their hearts may be softened and they see the light. We will not stop fighting for these innocent souls. Grandparents love saved persecuted. Asterisk. Underneath, the comments were already rolling in from her church friends and random aunts I haven't seen in a decade. Asterisk. Stay strong, Maeve. You did the right thing. Asterisk. One comment read, asterisk, persecuted for righteousness' sake. Keep fighting. Asterisk, said another. Asterisk. They are lucky to have you. Parents these days don't know what's good for their kids, said a third. They were publicly shaming us. They were painting a narrative where they were the heroes saving the children from the godless, cruel parents. They were weaponizing their entire social circle against us in real time. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. This was not just a family spat. This was a reputation destruction campaign. They were trying to isolate us. They were trying to make us look unfit so that if they did take us to court, they would have a choir of character witnesses singing their praises. Nina snatched the phone back. Report it, she said, her fingers flying across the screen. Report it for harassment. Report it for posting photos of minors without consent. We are not letting them control the narrative. I pulled out my own phone and opened the app. I felt sick seeing my own mother, the woman who raised me, tearing me down to her 300 friends just to get validation for her boundary stomping. I went to the post, reported it, and then I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I navigated to my block list. I clicked on Maeve. Block. I clicked on Clarence. Block. Then I went through the friends list and started blocking every single person who had commented support on that post. Aunt Linda, Cousin Sarah, the lady from the choir. I was burning the village down. I was cutting off the supply. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. But they were not going to get a front row seat to my life while they did it. Nina looked up from her phone, her eyes hard. They are not just going to stop with Facebook, Quentin. You know that, right? They feel justified. They think they are on a crusade. I know, I said, looking at the front door as if I expected them to try and break it down. And then the doorbell rang. It was 10:30 at night. Nobody rings a doorbell at 10:30 at night unless it is an emergency or a threat. Nina and I froze. The silence in the house was deafening. Don't answer it, Nina whispered. I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. It wasn't my parents. It was worse. It was Pastor Dave, the head of their church, standing on my porch with a Bible in his hand and a very serious look on his face. They had sent in the cavalry. I stared through the peephole, watching Pastor Dave shift his weight from foot to foot on my porch. He looked uncomfortable, like a man who had been sent on a mission he didn't fully sign up for but couldn't refuse because, well, God and tithes. Nina was standing behind me, her arms crossed so tight her knuckles were white. Do not open that door, Quentin, she hissed. If you open that door, you are inviting their circus into our safe space. I knew she was right, but I also knew Dave. If I didn't address him, he would stand there all night. Or worse, start praying loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. I unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open about 3 inches, keeping my foot firmly planted at the base so he couldn't push his way in. Dave, it is 10:30 at night, I said, keeping my voice flat. Unless you are here to deliver a pizza, you need to turn around and leave. He put on his best sympathetic pastoral face. Quentin, brother, I am just here to facilitate some healing. Your mother called me in absolute hysterics. She is worried about the spiritual warfare happening in this house. She feels unsafe for the children. I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Unsafe? Dave, she waterboarded my kids in a salad bowl while we were gone. She violated a direct boundary we set as parents. There is no warfare here, just a grandmother who doesn't know how to respect the word no. Dave sighed, clutching his Bible like a shield. Look, I know tensions are high, but Maeve and Clarence are devout people. They acted out of love. They are terrified for Titus and Zara's eternal destination. Can't we all just sit down? Maybe pray together and find a middle ground? They just want to ensure the kids are being raised with moral fiber. That was the phrase that tipped me off. Moral fiber. Asterisk. That wasn't Dave talking. That was Clarence. There is no middle ground on my children's autonomy, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. And if you are here to act as their attorney, you can tell them that my next call isn't to a mediator, it is to a lawyer. Get off my porch, Dave. Now. I slammed the door before he could get another butt brother out. I locked it and leaned my forehead against the cold wood, shaking. They had mobilized the church leadership in less than an hour. They were building a coalition. I walked back into the kitchen where Nina was furiously scrolling on her iPad. Her face was illuminated by the blue light, and she looked like she was about to be sick. You need to see this, she said, her voice trembling. It is not just the one post, Quentin. Look at the comments. Look at what they are saying. I looked. The post had been shared 14 times. 14 times in an hour. And not just by family. It was in the local community watch group. It was in the Moms of Town name group. Maeve had tagged herself at my house. The caption on the shared post in the Moms group read, * prayer warriors needed. My son and his wife have lost their way and are denying us access to our grandbabies after we tried to save them. Please pray for the children's safety in that godless home. *. Comments were rolling in from strangers. Local strangers. People I see at the grocery store. *. This is disgusting. Parents have rights? Keep fighting, Grandma. If they are denying access, maybe you should call for a welfare check? A welfare check. My blood ran cold. They were seeding the idea of us being unfit parents to the entire community. They were weaponizing their victimhood to get strangers to harass us. But then I heard something from upstairs. A small thud, then crying. I took the stairs 2 at a time, Nina right behind me. We burst into Titus's room. He was sitting up in bed, sobbing, clutching his knees to his chest. Zara was asleep in the other bed, but Titus looked terrified. Buddy, what's wrong? I asked, rushing over and sitting on the edge of the bed. Did you have a nightmare? He looked at me, his eyes red and puffy. Daddy, am I still dirty? My heart shattered. No, Titus. You were never dirty. Who told you that? Grandma said. I was black inside, he hiccuped. She said, because you and Mommy don't take us to the building with the cross. My heart is black and sticky like tar. She said if I didn't let her wash it, the bad man with the horns would come get me while I sleep. I felt a murderous rage ignite in my chest. This wasn't just tonight. You don't instill that kind of complex theological fear in a 6-year-old in 20 minutes. This was deep programming. Buddy, listen to me, I said, grabbing his shoulders gently. That is a lie. Grandma told you a lie. Your heart is good. There is no bad man coming for you. Did she tell you this tonight? He shook his head. No. She tells us every time you guys leave. She shows us the pictures in the book. What book, Titus? Nina asked, her voice dangerously soft. The book in her bag, he whispered. The one with the scary fire. I looked at Nina. She immediately started tearing the room apart. She checked the closet, the toy bin, and then she found it. Stuffed under the mattress of the spare bed where Maeve sometimes naps when she babysits. It was a tote bag. Nina dumped it out on the floor. It wasn't just a Bible. It was a stash of children's tracts, the kind with gruesome, cartoonish depictions of hellfire, demons with sharp teeth, and children looking terrified. There were coloring books about obeying your elders or else. There were flashcards with verses about punishment. They have been brainwashing them, Nina whispered, holding up a coloring page that Titus had clearly worked on weeks ago. It was a picture of a family burning, and he had colored the flames orange. This wasn't a one-time boundary cross. This was a systematic campaign of indoctrination happening right under our noses for months. Every date night, every time we trusted them, they were feeding our children nightmare fuel. They were teaching them to fear us, to fear the world, to fear their own thoughts. I felt sick. I physically gagged. We had paid them. We had bought them dinner. We had thanked them for watching the kids, thinking they were baking cookies and watching Bluey, while they were literally traumatizing our son with fire and brimstone. I grabbed the bag. I'm burning this, I said. I am taking this outside and burning every single page. No. Nina stopped me, grabbing my arm. No burning. Evidence. This is evidence of psychological abuse, Quentin. If they want to call CPS, let them. We have proof that they are terrorizing minors with graphic imagery. We went back downstairs, leaving the kids' door open with the hallway light on so Titus wouldn't be scared. We laid the tracks out on the kitchen island. The Hell is Real pamphlet, the Disobedient Children comic book. It was a gallery of horrors. My phone rang again. It wasn't a number I recognized. It was a local landline. I picked it up, expecting another church member. Hello? Mr. Quentin Miller? A stern female voice asked. Speaking. This is Officer Reynolds from the police department. We received a call requesting a welfare check on 2 minors at this address. The caller stated there was a disturbance and potential neglect. We have a unit en route. Please step outside with your hands visible. The room spun. They actually did it. They called the cops. They were swatting us. I looked at Nina. The police are here, I said, my voice hollow. They called a welfare check. Nina didn't panic. She didn't scream. She looked at the tracks on the table, then at the wet shirts in the corner, then at me. Let them come, she said, her eyes cold as steel. Let them come and see exactly what loving grandparents do to children. Blue lights flashed through the front window, illuminating the living room in a chaotic, strobing rhythm. I opened the front door with my hands clearly visible, just like Officer Reynolds asked. And the first thing I saw was the blinding strobes of 2 patrol cars lighting up my entire suburban street. My neighbors were already peeking out through their blinds, phones in hand, probably live streaming the downfall of the godless Miller family. Officer Reynolds was a tall, no-nonsense woman who looked like she had dealt with enough family drama for one lifetime. Beside her was a younger officer who looked ready to tackle someone. "Mr. Miller? We received a report of child endangerment and a domestic disturbance involving shouting and potential substance abuse," Reynolds said, her hand resting near her belt. "We need to check on the welfare of the children immediately." Substance abuse? They had told the cops we were on drugs. That was the level of low they were willing to stoop to. They wanted to get the kids taken away tonight. "There is no substance abuse here, officer," I said, keeping my voice scary calm. "My wife and children are inside. The only disturbance was my parents performing a non-consensual religious ritual on my 6-year-old and refusing to leave. I invited them inside. Nina was waiting in the kitchen, holding the bag of Hellfire tracks we found under the mattress. The kids were upstairs, thankfully quiet. Reynolds and her partner did a sweep of the house, checking the fridge, the pantry, and the kids' rooms. When they came back down, the tension in the room dropped about 50%. They saw a clean house, sober parents, and sleeping kids. But then Nina dropped the bomb. She laid out the coloring books on the island. The ones with the demons eating children. The ones with the fire. "Officer, before you go, you need to see why we kicked the grandparents out," Nina said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is what they were feeding my 6-year-old while we were gone. This is why he is terrified to sleep tonight." Reynolds picked up one of the pamphlets. It was a graphic cartoon of a boy burning in a lake of fire for disobeying his elders. She actually grimaced. "This was given to your son?" she asked, looking from the book to me. "By the people who called you," I said. "They are trying to weaponize the police because we set a boundary. This is harassment." Reynolds let out a long sigh, the kind that says, "I hate my job." "Look, Mr. Miller, this isn't illegal. Technically. It is creepy. Yeah, but unless they physically harmed the kids, it is a civil matter. However, the false report about drugs? That is a different story. We will be documenting this as a malicious call. I suggest you get a restraining order if you feel they are a threat." As soon as they left, the silence in the house was deafening. We didn't sleep. We sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the driveway. Every car that drove by made my heart stop. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I went straight to a family law attorney. I slapped the bag of tracks, the photos of the wet shirts, and the printouts of the Facebook comments on his desk. "I want them gone," I told him. "I want a no-contact order. I want them to legally not be allowed to mention my children's names on social media." The lawyer, a guy named Mr. Henderson, who looked like a shark in a suit, nodded as he flipped through the evidence. "We can file for an emergency protective order based on the psychological distress to the child and the harassment. The false police report helps. But be warned, Quentin, this is the nuclear option. Once we serve this, there is no going back to Thanksgiving dinners." "I don't want Thanksgiving," I said. "I want my kids to not be terrified of their own grandparents." We filed the paperwork that afternoon. The sheriff was scheduled to serve Clarence and Maeve the next morning. We thought that would be the end of it for a few days. We thought the legal threat would scare them into silence. We were wrong. They weren't scared. They were on a mission from God, and you can't serve a restraining order to a martyr complex. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a scratching noise, like metal on wood. It was coming from the back door. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep under the bed. A cliché, I know, but when your adrenaline is spiking, you don't care about clichés. I touched Nina's arm to wake her up and put a finger to my lips. She sat up, eyes wide, instantly awake. "Stay with the kids," I whispered. "Call 911. I crept down the hallway, avoiding the squeaky floorboard on the 3rd step. The scratching got louder. Then I heard muttering. Low, rhythmic chanting. I peeked around the corner into the kitchen. The back door has a large glass pane in the center. Through the glass, illuminated by the backyard motion sensor light that had just flickered on, I saw them. It wasn't a burglar. It was Clarence and Maeve. Clarence was holding a bottle of olive oil, literally cooking oil, and he was smearing it on the doorframe. He was making crosses in oil on the wood. Maeve was kneeling on the patio concrete, her hands pressed against the glass, speaking in tongues or praying. I couldn't tell. She was rocking back and forth, eyes closed, looking completely unhinged. They were anointing my house. They were trying to break the demonic stronghold they thought Nina and I had over the children. I didn't open the door. I slammed my hand against the glass from the inside. Bang! Maeve screamed and scrambled backward, falling over onto the patio furniture. Clarence dropped the oil bottle, which shattered on the concrete. They looked like deer caught in headlights, but instead of fear, Clarence looked furious. "Open this door, Quentin," he shouted, his voice muffled by the glass but loud enough to wake the dead. "We are cleansing this house. You are under spiritual attack. Let us in to pray over the children." "You are trespassing," I screamed back, not caring who heard me. "The police are on the way." Get off my property. You are possessed, Maeve shrieked, scrambling to her feet. Nina has blinded you. She is a Jezebel. We have to save the babies. She threw herself against the door. I could see the madness in her eyes. This wasn't just religion anymore. This was a psychotic break. She was clawing at the handle, trying to force it open. I saw the blue lights reflect off the kitchen cabinets before I heard the sirens. This time, I hadn't called the non-emergency line. Nina had called for an active break-in. Officer Reynolds was back. And this time, she wasn't sighing. I watched through the glass as two officers grabbed Clarence by the arms. He was resisting, shouting scripture at them. Maeve was on the ground, weeping, holding onto the door handle until they physically pulled her away. "Don't you touch me. I am the grandmother. I have rights," she screamed as they cuffed her. I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the patio. The smell of cheap olive oil was overwhelming. My parents, the people who taught me to ride a bike, were being shoved into the back of a squad car in my backyard at 2 a.m. Clarence looked at me through the window of the cruiser. He didn't look sorry. He looked like he hated me. He looked like he was the one being persecuted. Officer Reynolds walked up to me, shaking her head. "Mr. Miller, we are taking them in for trespassing and attempted breaking and entering. You need to come down to the station in the morning to file the formal statement." I nodded, feeling numb. I looked at the oil smeared on my doorframe. It looked like slime. Nina came out, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't say a word. She just handed me my phone. It was a text from an unknown number. It was from Pastor Dave. * Quinton. I heard the police scanner. "You had your own parents arrested? For praying? You have started a war. You cannot win. The congregation is meeting tomorrow to discuss how to support Clarence and Maeve. You need to come to the church tomorrow night and explain yourself, or we will be forced to take public action to protect those children." An ultimatum. They were going to rally the entire church against us. I looked at Nina. "I am done playing defense," I said. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I am going to that meeting," I said. "And I am going to burn their reputation to the ground." The next morning, the air in our house felt toxic. It was the kind of heavy silence you get before a hurricane makes landfall. Nina was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. In front of her was the Hellfire tote bag we had confiscated from the kids' room. But she wasn't looking at the tracks anymore. She was holding a crumpled, yellowed envelope that had been tucked inside the back cover of Clarence's leather-bound Bible. "You need to read this before we go," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "If you are going to burn them down, this is the match." I took the letter. It was postmarked from 1995. It was addressed to Clarence. I pulled out the single sheet of lined paper. My hands started shaking as I read the first line. "Dad, I know you don't want to hear from me, but Mom is sick. We need help. You have a grandson you've never met. His name is Noah. Please, just acknowledge us once." It was signed, "Your son, Robert." I stared at the paper. "Robert? I have a brother. A half-brother. I never knew existed." Clarence had a whole other life before Maeve, a life he had scrubbed clean to build his perfect, pious image. He had a son he abandoned. A grandson he ignored. "He has a grandson named Noah," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical punch. "He is obsessing over my kids' souls, trying to break into my house to save them, while he let his own flesh and blood suffer in silence for 30 years. "It gets worse," Nina said, pointing to a notation on the back of the envelope in Clarence's handwriting. "Do not reply. Past is dead. Lord forgive." He had prayed about it and decided to ghost his own child. That was the moral high ground he was standing on. "We are going to that meeting," I said, folding the letter and putting it in my pocket. "And we are going to introduce the congregation to Robert." We pulled up to the church at 7 p.m. The parking lot was full. It looked like a Wednesday night service, but I knew this was a tribunal. They had called an emergency fellowship meeting. That is code for public shaming. I walked in holding Nina's hand. We walked straight down the center aisle. The silence was instant. 200 heads turned. I saw faces I had known my whole life: Sunday school teachers, deacons, the lady who makes the potato salad. They all looked at us with a mix of pity and judgment. Clarence and Maeve were sitting in the front row. They had been bailed out that morning. They looked haggard but righteous, holding hands like martyrs facing a firing squad. Maeve had a bandage on her wrist where the cuffs had been. She looked at me with teary eyes, playing the victim perfectly. Pastor Dave stood at the pulpit. He looked down at us, adjusting his glasses. "Quinton, Nina, we are glad you came," Dave said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We are here to heal this rift. Your parents are hurting. They acted out of love, and you responded with police force. We as a church family believe you are under a dark influence. We want to pray for you, but first, you need to repent for dishonoring your father and mother." "Repent?" I said, my voice echoing in the quiet sanctuary. I didn't wait for a microphone. I projected. You want me to repent for protecting my children from people who break into my home at 2 a.m. with cooking oil? They were trying to spiritually cleanse a home that has clearly lost its way. Dave shot back, getting nods from the front row. Clarence and Maeve are pillars of this community. They have dedicated their lives to the Lord and to family. And you had them arrested like criminals. Clarence stood up then, turning to face the crowd. He looked dramatic, sad. I forgive him, Clarence announced, his voice trembling. I forgive my son for his anger. I only want to see my grandchildren in heaven. Is that a crime? To want your bloodline to be saved? Your bloodline? I asked, stepping forward. The adrenaline was making my vision sharp. You care so much about your bloodline, Dad. Is that why you did it? Yes, Clarence shouted, getting into the performance. Because family is everything. A man who does not care for his own is worse than an unbeliever. Then tell them about Robert, I said. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Clarence's face went from righteous to gray in a split second. Maeve gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew. She had been part of the cover-up. Who? Pastor Dave asked, looking confused. I pulled the letter out of my pocket. I held it up like a weapon. Robert, I repeated, walking toward the pulpit. Your son. My brother. The one you abandoned in 1995. The one who wrote to you begging for help because his mother was sick. The one who told you that you have another grandson named Noah. I turned to the congregation. You all know Clarence as the man who is so obsessed with saving my kids that he'd go to jail for it. But did you know he has a grandson? He has never met? Did you know he has a son? He pretended didn't exist, so he could maintain his perfect Christian image for you people. I looked at Clarence. He was shaking. He wasn't the strong patriarch anymore. He was a liar exposed. You wrote "past is dead" on this envelope, Dad, I said, my voice breaking. You threw your own child away. And now you want to lecture me about how to raise mine? You don't care about souls. You care about control. You care about looking good. That is a lie. Maeve shrieked, standing up. That was before we were saved. That was a different life. But you kept the letter, Nina cut in, her voice slicing through the noise. You kept it in your Bible, Maeve. You knew. You knew he had a grandson out there, and you let him rot while you tried to force your way into our lives. That isn't redemption. That is hypocrisy. The murmur in the crowd started. It grew into a rumble. I saw the deacons looking at each other. I saw the judgment shifting. In this community, family abandonment is a cardinal sin. You can be strict. You can be crazy. But you cannot abandon your own blood. Pastor Dave looked at the letter in my hand, then at Clarence. He looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. Clarence, Dave said, his voice low. Is this true? Do you have a son you haven't provided for? Clarence slumped into the pew. He couldn't speak. His silence was the confession. I turned back to the crowd. My parents aren't martyrs. They are narcissists who use God as a shield to hide their own failures. And if any of you support them after knowing they abandoned a child to poverty, then you are just as fake as they are. I grabbed Nina's hand. We are leaving. If anyone from this church contacts us, or my children, ever again, I will release the rest of the letters. Yes, there are more. There weren't more letters. But they didn't know that. We walked out. Nobody stopped us. The sound of Maeve sobbing and the congregation erupting into arguments followed us out the door. We got in the car, and for the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel afraid. I felt heavy, but I felt clean. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Did we just win? Nina asked, watching the church disappear in the rearview mirror. No, I said, gripping the steering wheel. We didn't win. We just survived. But they are done. They can't touch us now. If they try, the whole town knows their secret. But as we turned onto our street, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from my bank app. Asterisk alert. Joint savings account overdraft. $12,000. My blood ran cold. My parents didn't have access to my bank account. But then I remembered. When we bought the house 5 years ago, Clarence had co-signed on the original loan account to help us get a better rate. We never used that account, but it was linked to our main savings as a backup for overdraft protection. He hadn't just given up. He had drained our emergency fund before the bank closed for the day. He knew the meeting was coming. This was his contingency plan. Nina, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Check the bank account. Nina stared at her phone screen, the blue light illuminating a face that had gone completely numb. $12,000. That was our emergency fund, our roof repair fund, the money we had scraped together over 3 years of skipping vacations and eating leftovers. And in one click, Clarence had wiped it out. He took it all, Nina whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a terrifying kind of finality. He knew, Quentin. He knew before we even walked into that church meeting that he was going to lose. This was his severance package. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. It wasn't just theft, it was a punishment. It was a final petty screw you for daring to defy him. He had co-signed that account 5 years ago to help us get a better interest rate on a loan, and we had stupidly, naively never removed him. He sat on that access like a sleeper agent, waiting for the moment we stepped out of line. Call the bank, I said, peeling out of the neighborhood and heading straight for the police station. Freeze everything. Report it as fraud. I can't, Nina said, scrolling frantically. His name is on the account. Quentin. Technically it's his money too. The bank won't see it as theft. They'll see it as a joint owner making a withdrawal. She was right. The legal loophole was big enough to drive a truck through. He hadn't broken the law. He had weaponized trust. We spent the next 4 hours at the police station, but it was useless. Officer Reynolds looked at the bank statement and then at us with genuine pity. Because his name was on the authorized user list, it was a civil matter. We could sue him, sure, but that would take months and cost thousands in legal fees. We no longer had. They had nuked us. They had destroyed our reputation, traumatized our kids, and now they had robbed us blind. I sat on the plastic bench in the station lobby, feeling a darkness settle in my chest. My phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. I answered, putting it on speaker so Nina could hear. Hello, son. Maeve's voice came through, sounding eerily calm. Not the hysterical woman screaming about demons on my patio, but the cold, calculating matriarch I had grown up with. Where is the money, Mom? I asked, my voice dead. Consider it back pay, she said, and I could hear the smugness dripping from her words. For the years of raising you, for the sacrifices we made, and for the pain you caused us tonight. You humiliated us in front of our community, Quentin. You destroyed our good name. God provides for the righteous, and he has restored what the locusts have eaten. You stole from your grandchildren, I said. That money was for their future. You just stole from the very souls you claimed to be saving. We are saving it for them, she countered instantly. Since you are unfit to raise them in the light, we will hold this in a trust for when they turn 18. Provided, of course, they come to us. If you want any support, you will bring them to church on Sunday. If not, well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. It was a ransom. They were holding our life savings hostage in exchange for access to the kids. I looked at Nina. She shook her head slowly. We both knew the answer. Keep it, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Excuse me? Keep the money, I repeated, feeling a sudden massive weight lift off my shoulders. That $12,000? That is the price of admission to get you out of our lives. It is a severance check. You can take the money, Mom. You can take the church reputation. You can take your victim complex. But you will never, ever see Titus or Zara again. You just sold your son and your grandkids for 12 grand. I hope it was worth it. You will come crawling back, she hissed. You need us. I have a brother named Robert, I said, my voice steady. I think I will reach out to him instead. I bet he has some interesting stories to tell about how loving you two are. Goodbye, Maeve. I hung up. I didn't just hang up. I blocked the number. Then I called my provider and changed my number entirely. We went home to a dark house, but for the first time in a week, it felt safe. We didn't have money, but we had the truth. The next morning, I did exactly what I said I would. I found the letter from Robert. I searched his name online. It wasn't hard to find him. He lived 2 towns over. He was a mechanic. He had a Facebook profile full of pictures of a teenager named Noah, my nephew. I sent him a message. Hi, I'm Quentin. Clarence is my dad, too. I just found out about you. I think we have a lot to talk about, he replied in 10 minutes. I've been waiting for this message for 20 years. Coffee's on me. The fallout was messy. The church split down the middle. Half of them sided with my parents, believing we were possessed demons who hated Grandma. The other half, the ones who heard the truth about Robert, quietly stopped attending. My parents were left with a smaller, more radical kingdom ruling over a pile of ashes. We never got the money back. We had to take out a small loan to cover the bills that month. We ate ramen for a few weeks. We had to explain to Titus that we couldn't go to Disney World that year like we planned. But a month later, on a Saturday afternoon, I watched from the kitchen window as Titus and Zara chased a soccer ball around the backyard. They weren't wearing white robes. They weren't scared of fire. They were laughing. And sitting on the patio bench cheering them on was a guy who looked just like me, only with a few more gray hairs and grease under his fingernails. Robert? He turned to me, holding a beer, and grinned. You know, they tried to pull that baptism stunt on Noah when he was a baby, too. I threatened to call the cops then. Guess some things never change. They changed for me, I said, leaning against the doorframe. I looked at my phone. No missed calls. No guilt trips. No passive-aggressive scriptures. Just a text from Nina saying she was picking up pizza. My parents had baptized my kids into a world of fear and control. But by fighting back, by burning the bridge and paying the toll, I had baptized my family into something else. Freedom. And honestly, that was worth every single penny.